You can't keep ignoring this. It affects both of us. I need you to tell me the truth for once.
It is not that simple, and you know it.
The rain came down in heavy, relentless sheets the morning Maya walked through the towering iron gates of Oakidge High. To anyone standing near the school's front entrance, she was nothing more than an easy target, a small, pale girl drowning in an oversized, faded sweater, her head bowed against the storm, holding a frayed canvas backpack with both hands. Her footsteps were quiet, almost non-existent against the wet asphalt. Dozens of eyes tracked her movement from under the covered walkway. Whispers rippled through the crowd of students, sharp and expectant. In a school like Oakidge, hierarchy was everything, and new transfers were judged within seconds. What nobody standing under that awning knew, what no one in this town could have possibly imagined, was that Maya's silence was not born out of fear. The faint, barely visible scars lining her wrists were not from accidents, and her slow, rhythmic breathing was the result of 15 long years of brutal, unforgiving conditioning. She had been trained from early childhood in an ancient, uncompromising branch of martial arts designed not for sport or competition, but for survival. Under the strict eyes of her lineage, she had learned how to redirect force, break bones with the heel of her hand, and make her body move faster than human reaction time. But her grandfather's final rule was absolute: true mastery is invisible. You never strike unless life itself demands it. Maya had moved to Oakidge with her grandfather, a quiet, stoic man who operated a small antique repair shop on the outskirts of town. He was her last remaining family after her parents died in an accident years ago, and his health was failing fast. He wanted her to have a normal life, to experience high school, make friends, and exist without the burden of her deadly training. Maya promised him she would be invisible. She promised she would absorb insults, look away from provocation, and keep her hands at her sides no matter what happened. So, when she walked into her first period classroom, she took the seat in the very back, pulled her hood low, and kept her eyes glued to her sketchbook. It took less than 48 hours for the school's social elite to single her out. Julian, the star quarterback whose father sat on the town council, ruled Oakidge with a quiet, arrogant cruelty. Beside him was Chloe, whose influence in the halls was just as absolute. They didn't just pick on people for fun, they methodically destroyed anyone who threatened their dominance or refused to bow to them. Maya's refusal to shrink in terror when Julian walked past, her refusal to acknowledge his existence, felt like a direct insult to his authority. He couldn't stand the way her dark eyes remained completely calm whenever he tried to intimidate her. The first direct confrontation happened in the crowded cafeteria during Thursday lunch. Maya was sitting alone at a small wooden table near the corner, sketching the ancient oak tree outside the window. Julian walked past with a tray full of hot soup and chocolate milk. With a deliberate, calculated twist of his heel, he stumbled, sending the entire tray crashing onto Maya's table. The hot liquid soaked through her clothes and ruined hours of intricate line art. The cafeteria instantly fell silent. Hundreds of students froze, waiting for the tears, the screaming, or the frantic scrambling to clean up that usually followed an encounter with Julian. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't drop her shoulders, and her heart rate didn't even spike. She slowly closed her wet sketchbook, picked up a single paper napkin, and began wiping the milk off her hands. Then, she raised her head and looked Julian dead in the eyes. Her gaze wasn't filled with rage or sorrow, it was completely empty, cold, and assessing. In that brief second of eye contact, Maya noted Julian's stance. His weight was heavily biased toward his left leg, suggesting a poorly rehabilitated knee injury, and his shoulders were tense, leaving his ribs wide open. To Maya, he wasn't a terrifying bully, he was a walking collection of structural flaws. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second under her gaze, unnerved by her total lack of fear. To mask his sudden discomfort, he laughed loudly, turning to his friends and calling her a pathetic freak who didn't even have the brain capacity to cry. He kicked her chair out from under her as he walked away, sending it clattering across the linoleum floor. Maya quietly picked up her chair, sat back down, and continued wiping her table. She had promised her grandfather no violence, but inside her chest, the ancient discipline was already calculating distance, timing, and strike vectors. Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment escalated into a campaign of relentless torment. Julian and his inner circle made it their personal mission to break Maya's spirit. They knocked her books from her arms in overcrowded hallways, jammed her locker with glue, and spread vile rumors across social media. Through it all, Maya remained a ghost. She absorbed every petty strike, every cruel word, storing her reaction deep within herself. But her quiet endurance only infuriated Julian more. He didn't want tolerance, he wanted absolute submission. He wanted to see the new girl broken on her knees, begging for mercy. The tipping point arrived on a freezing Friday afternoon after the final bell. The hallways were clearing out, leaving the back wing near the gymnasium mostly deserted. Maya was packing her worn canvas bag when Chloe and 3 other girls blocked her exit path. Moments later, Julian and 2 of his heavy-set teammates stepped out from around the corner, trapping Maya between the metal lockers and the solid brick wall. The air in the hallway felt thick and suffocating. Chloe stepped forward, snatched Maya's backpack right off her shoulder, and unzipped it, dumping its contents out onto the dirty tile floor. Books, pencils, and personal belongings scattered across the hallway. Among the mess was a small, hand-carved wooden medallion depicting a coiled dragon, a gift Maya's grandfather had crafted for her before his hands became too arthritic to work wood. It was her most cherished possession, the last tangible link to her family's legacy. Julian stepped forward, his heavy boot crushing Maya's notebook as he scooped up the wooden dragon. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, tossing it mockingly into the air, a cruel smirk spreading across his face as he threatened to drop it down the sewer grate outside unless she got on her knees and begged. Maya's posture changed instantly. The subtle bend in her knees dropped, her center of gravity sank, and her breathing transformed into a slow, terrifyingly steady rhythm. She took 1 step forward. The air around her seemed to drop 10 degrees. Julian laughed, raising his hand higher to throw the medallion, but before his muscles could finish contracting, Maya moved. She did not raise her fists or drop into an exaggerated fighting stance. Her movement was an effortless, fluid blur, a shadow cutting through the space between them before anyone could blink. Her right hand darted out like a striking viper. Her index and middle fingers struck Julian's inner wrist with precise, sudden pressure, deadening the nerve bundle instantly. Julian's fingers went entirely limp, his hand dropping open as a shockwave of intense, numbing pain shot up his forearm. Before the wooden medallion could hit the floor, Maya's left hand swept through the air, catching the carving smoothly inches above the tile. In the same continuous motion, she stepped into Julian's personal space, her eyes inches from his, holding him frozen with a presence so dark and intense it made his blood run cold. Julian gasped, clutching his paralyzed arm, taking 2 frantic steps backward until his spine slammed into the lockers. Chloe let out a sharp, choked gasp, backing away until she nearly tripped over her own feet. The 2 big football players stepped forward instinctively, their faces full of confusion and sudden aggression, but Maya simply turned her head toward them. She didn't strike, she just adjusted her footing slightly, her eyes locking onto their throat lines. Something in her posture, a predator's absolute lack of hesitation, made both giant boys freeze in their tracks, their instincts screaming at them that taking another step forward would be a fatal mistake. Maya slid the wooden medallion safely into her inner sweater pocket, picked up her fallen bag, and walked between the 2 stunned athletes without looking back. As she reached the exit doors, she paused, her voice echoing softly down the quiet corridor. She told Julian that he had spent his whole life mistaking people's kindness for weakness, but if he ever put his hands on her belongings again, he would discover what real weakness felt like. She pushed the heavy doors open and walked out into the rain, leaving the feared king of Oakidge High shivering against a row of dented lockers. The humiliation of that moment fractured Julian's ego beyond repair. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't focus, and every time he looked at his hand, which stayed numb for hours after her touch, his rage burned hotter. He knew he couldn't let it slide. If word got out that a tiny transfer girl had put him on his knees with a touch, his reputation, his status, and his power at Oakidge would be destroyed forever. He didn't care about rules anymore. He didn't care about fairness. He wanted vengeance, and he was willing to use total, overwhelming force to get it. The opportunity came during the annual autumn festival held on the grounds behind the high school. As night fell, the fairgrounds were filled with flashing neon lights, loud music, and dense crowds of parents and teenagers. Maya had come to buy a specific herbal tea for her grandfather from a local vendor set up near the perimeter of the school grounds. She was walking along the narrow, dark alleyway that ran between the back of the gym and the heavy iron boundary fence, a shortcut leading away from the noise of the carnival, when she heard the footsteps behind her. Heavy, hurried, and deliberate. She didn't stop, she simply expanded her awareness, listening to the crunch of gravel under shoes. 4 men behind her, 2 coming around the front of the gym to cut her off. Within 3 seconds, Maya was surrounded in the pitch-black alleyway, far out of sight and earshot from the festival crowds. The bright neon carnival lights cast long, twisted shadows against the brick walls. Julian stepped out from the darkness ahead of her, surrounded by 5 of his largest, most aggressive teammates. In his right hand, Julian was gripping a solid steel iron pipe, his knuckles white, his eyes wild with unhinged fury. Julian spat on the ground, his voice dripping with venom as he told her that there were no teachers here, no security cameras, and no escape. He stepped closer, raising the iron pipe to point it directly at her face, telling her that tonight he was going to take everything from her, and when he was finished, she would never walk right again. The 5 boys around him laughed, closing the circle, pulling heavy brass knuckles and wooden bats from under their jackets. They thought they had backed a helpless rabbit into a trap, totally blind to the fact that they had voluntarily stepped into an arena with a deadly predator. Maya closed her eyes for a single heartbeat. In her mind, she saw her grandfather's tired, warm smile, and she silently asked for his forgiveness. She had tried to honor her promise. She had taken their cruelty, their insults, and their destruction of her things without striking back. But now, her life was on the line, and the ancient rules of her school were absolute: when survival is threatened, mercy is abandoned. When she opened her eyes, the soft, hesitant schoolgirl was gone entirely. In her place stood a high-ranking martial arts master, cold, focused, and utterly ruthless. The largest boy, a 6'4" defensive lineman weighing over 250 pounds, lunged first. He swung a heavy, wild right hook straight for Maya's temple, intending to knock her unconscious with a single blow. Maya didn't dodge backward or flinch. She stepped into the strike, crossing his guard before his arm could fully extend. She caught his wrist with her left hand, redirecting his immense forward momentum upward, and struck him squarely in the solar plexus with an open palm strike backed by her entire core rotation. The force of the strike sounded like a cannon going off in the narrow alley. The massive teenager's eyes rolled back, every breath instantly blasted out of his lungs. He collapsed to his knees like a felled tree, gasping helplessly for air, clutching his abdomen before he even realized what had happened. Before he even hit the dirt, the second attacker swung a wooden bat toward her ribs from the left. Maya ducked under the arc of the bat with terrifying swiftness, sweeping her right leg out in a low, devastating circle. Her foot struck the boy's standing ankle with surgical precision, shattering his balance and sending him crashing headfirst into the brick wall. The remaining 3 boys backed up a step, their faces pale with sudden, horrifying realization, but their adrenaline forced them forward together. They rushed her at the exact same time from 3 different angles, trying to overwhelm her through sheer mass and numbers. What followed over the next 60 seconds was not a brawl, it was an absolute masterclass in lethal combat design. Maya moved through the dark alley like water flowing around jagged rocks, evading deadly blows by millimeters, utilizing low center of gravity pivots, and striking nerve clusters, knees, and throats with absolute, terrifying efficiency. A wild punch was met with a joint lock that popped a shoulder out of its socket. A lunging tackle was met with a swift palm strike to the chin that shut down the central nervous system instantly. Every strike Maya delivered was calculated to disarm, disable, and neutralize without taking a life, yet the sheer speed and absolute power behind her small frame defied every law of physics these boys knew. One by one, the elite athletes of Oakidge High fell to the muddy gravel, groaning, hyperventilating, and clutching broken bones, entirely broken by a girl who hadn't even lost her breath. 90 seconds after the first attack began, 5 large young men were sprawling in the dirt, completely incapacitated, unable to stand or fight. The narrow alleyway fell dead silent, save for the faint sound of carnival music echoing over the roof of the gym and the painful, heavy groans of Julian's crew. Maya stood in the center of the carnage, her feet planted shoulder-width apart, her sweater completely clean, her hair barely out of place. Her chest rose and fell in slow, perfectly controlled rhythmic cycles. She didn't look triumphant, she looked deeply sad. Julian stood at the mouth of the alley, frozen in place. The heavy steel pipe slipped from his numb, trembling fingers, falling to the concrete with a loud, metallic clang that shattered the silence. His knees were shaking violently, his face drained of all color, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the mountain of his fallen friends. He looked at Maya not as a student, not as a transfer girl, and not even as a human being, but as an unstoppable force of nature that he had foolishly provoked out of pure, arrogant ignorance. The monster he had tried to create had revealed that she was the master all along. Maya walked toward Julian slowly. Her footsteps made no sound against the gravel. Julian tried to run, tried to force his legs to move, but his sheer terror had locked his joints in place. He backed up until his shoulder blades hit the heavy iron fence surrounding the school grounds, trapped in the very dead end he had prepared for her. Maya stopped 3 inches from his face. The cold, neon light from the carnival painted half of her face in deep red and blue. Julian squeezed his eyes shut, bowing his head, sobbing openly as he begged her not to kill him, promising he would do anything, give her anything, if she just let him live. Maya did not raise her hand. She did not strike him. She simply reached out with gentle, precise fingers and plucked a small piece of stray lint off the collar of his jacket. Then, her voice, low, soft, and terrifyingly clear, cut through his sobbing. She told him that true strength does not come from the ability to hurt others, nor does it come from titles, wealth, or fear. True strength is having the ultimate power to destroy someone completely, and choosing every single day to exercise restraint, mercy, and peace. She told him that he was not her enemy, because he was far too weak to ever hold that title. She turned her back on him completely, leaving herself wide open, but Julian was far too shattered to ever make a move again. Maya picked up her bag of herbal tea from the dry ground near the entrance, placed it carefully into her canvas bag, and walked away into the shadows of the night. The next morning, word of what had happened behind the gym did not come from Maya. It didn't need to. Julian and his crew returned to school on Monday battered, quiet, and completely transformed. They didn't look at anyone, they didn't speak to anyone, and Julian resigned from the football team before the end of the week. The culture of fear that had gripped Oakidge High for years dissolved almost overnight. Students who had been tormented for months began to walk with their heads held high, no longer afraid of the bullies who had been so thoroughly, quietly stripped of their power. Maya continued her life as she always had, sitting in the back of the classroom, sketching in her notebook, attending to her grandfather, and remaining completely humble. She never bragged, she never brought up the alleyway, and she never used her training to gain status. She proved that the loudest people in the room are often the weakest, and that true power never needs to shout, it only needs to stand firm in the storm.